His wedding anniversary culminated in an evening of profound humiliation. They were seated at a long table in the heart of a bustling Manhattan restaurant, surrounded by the clinking of glasses, polite laughter, and hushed murmurs. From the outside, it might have looked like a celebration, but Darius already sensed the impending storm. Marina, his wife, was seated beside him, adorned in an emerald dress, a diamond pendant catching the chandelier's sparkle. Across from them sat her closest friends from college and their husbands, men in impeccably tailored suits, casually tossing Tesla keys onto the table, a silent reproach highlighting the gaping chasm between their world and Darius's. Marina leaned back in her chair, her fingers idly toying with the stem of her wine glass. Her friends chatted about trips to Paris and boasted about their husbands' new electric cars. Darius remained silent, trying to focus on his meal, but then Marina's voice, sharp and derisive, pierced the atmosphere. "You know," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, "while your husbands are closing deals and cruising in Teslas, my darling is busy scrubbing toilets in Manhattan." The laughter at the table was hesitant, but Marina's smile widened as if she savored every word. Darius felt as if he were caught in a vice. He felt blood rush to his face, but he forced himself not to move. He tried to convince himself it was just a bad joke, but deep down, he knew the truth. She meant every word. He attempted to look away, pretending to be captivated by a flickering candle, but Marina suddenly stood up. She raised her glass, and something unfamiliar, a cold triumph, flashed in her eyes. "To new beginnings," she declared. "I want a divorce." Time seemed to stop. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Conversations at neighboring tables died mid-sentence. Marina's voice was mercilessly clear as she continued, "I'm tired of living with a janitor. I deserve a man who can give me the life I dream of. Someone rich. Someone who is my equal." Darius's throat went dry. He stared at her face, searching for any shadow of doubt, any flicker that this was a cruel joke, but she merely smirked as her friends whispered and exchanged knowing glances. Darius pushed his chair back abruptly, the screech of its legs across the polished floor shattering the silence. He couldn't utter a word. His voice caught in his throat under the crushing weight of humiliation. Silently, he turned and walked out of the restaurant. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, and the cold night air bit his face. He had never felt so worthless, so betrayed. Darius Cole wasn't born into luxury or privilege. For several years, he had worked as a janitor in New York City. Every morning, he put on his uniform, laced up his work boots, and entered the steel and glass skyscrapers. He swept marble floors, polished chrome railings, and cleaned up after the very men in impeccable suits who barely spared him a glance as they walked by. To most, he was invisible, but to Darius, his work was a symbol of honor, proof that he could stand on his own 2 feet and provide for his family without resorting to lies, theft, or dependence on anyone. It wasn't a prestigious job, but he was proud of it. His hands were calloused, his back ached almost every night, but he found dignity in seeing the floors gleam with cleanliness thanks to his efforts. Looking at his reflection in a spotless surface, he reminded himself that true worth wasn't in titles or salaries, but in the willingness to keep going when life challenged you. He would be lying, however, if he said Marina ever shared his perspective. From the moment they moved to New York, she made it clear that the life he was building wasn't enough for her. She was drawn to the gleaming storefronts of Fifth Avenue, the silent electric cars gliding through the streets, and the luxurious penthouses towering above the city lights. She measured happiness by status symbols and luxury, while for Darius, it lay in integrity, family, and the quiet pride of knowing he never cut corners. At first, he desperately tried to mend the cracks in their relationship. He took on extra shifts so Marina could afford the clothes she desired. He skimped on food, dreaming of a modest vacation together. He convinced himself that love was the art of compromise, and if he worked tirelessly, she would see him not just as a man in a uniform, but as a dependable partner. However, the more he tried, the wider the chasm between them grew. Marina stopped seeing him as a life partner, perceiving him more as a burden hindering her progress, adding particular bitterness to the situation were his family circumstances. His father, Henrik Cole, had amassed a considerable fortune long before Darius was born. He was a man of tradition and control, expecting his son to follow in his footsteps and inherit the empire he had built. But Darius, young and stubborn, decided to forge his own path. Upon rejecting his predetermined role, he heard from his father that he was spurning a destiny many could only dream of. Their last encounter ended with a door slamming, and for many years they ceased all contact. His mother, Elena, was Henrik's complete opposite. Gentle, patient, and unfailingly supportive, she taught her son that money was fleeting, but character endured forever. In moments when Marina mocked him, when the world seemed to remind him he was just a janitor, he recalled her words, "Darius, it doesn't matter what shoes you wear. What matters is that you walk a path you can be proud of." His sister Thalia, much younger than him, grew up watching Darius stoically endure life's blows, and she admired him. In her eyes, he was a protector, an example of how to remain true to oneself without succumbing to external pressure. She would call him between college classes, telling him how proud she was of him to her friends. He never told her how much those words meant to him, but they were precisely what gave him strength in difficult moments. And of course, there was Grandpa Merrick, a fount of wisdom passed down through generations. He would sit young Darius on the porch and tell him about his trials during the war, the years lived in poverty, and an unyielding will to survive. "Hardships temper a man, Darius," he would say, "but how you overcome them defines who you become." These words deeply resonated with Darius and largely forged the inner strength Marina could never perceive. That evening in the restaurant, when Marina publicly humiliated him, the pain was sharp, but not new. It was the culmination of years of slights, the contemptuous glances cast at his uniform, the sighs when rent payments depleted their savings, the comparisons to her friends' successful husbands. Each such episode chipped away at their former intimacy until only contempt remained. Darius came to this dinner already burdened by her disappointment. His hands were calloused, his shirt subtly smelled of cleaning products, and his back ached from hard labor. Yet he convinced himself it was worth it, for it was their anniversary. He naively hoped that tonight, at least, she would see past the uniform to the loving man who sacrificed sleep and comfort to ensure they had enough. But Marina chose this very evening to announce her discontent to the world. The restaurant was filled with the aroma of roasted garlic and expensive wine, but Darius barely tasted his food. Marina's friends sparkled in designer dresses, their jewelry reflecting the soft light of the chandeliers. Their husbands, in elegant suits, displayed expensive watches. Darius, dressed in a meticulously ironed shirt, felt like an outsider amidst such opulence. He tried to focus on his meal to maintain the pretense of celebration, but Marina gave him no such quarter. She radiated in her emerald dress, but behind her beauty lurked the sharpness of contempt. She leaned towards her friends, smiling too widely, as if desperately trying to impress. Every time the conversation turned to expensive cars, exotic travels, or high-paying jobs, Darius felt her gaze slide over him with an unspoken reproach. "You're not good enough." Marina's words felt like a condemnation. Leona, her friend, proudly described her husband's new Tesla, detailing how the doors elegantly lifted like the wings of an exotic bird. Admiration filled the table. Marina, seizing the moment, didn't miss her chance. Tilting her glass slightly towards him, she said with irony, "By the way, my husband is a professional cleaner. Who needs a Tesla when you always have a spotless house?" A quiet ripple of laughter spread across the table, but it was enough to ignite a storm of emotions within him. Inside, everything constricted with rising anger, which he had to suppress, reminding himself that an outburst would only worsen the situation. Clenching his hands under the table, he forced himself to remain calm. All words stuck in his throat. His pride in his work, his mother's and grandfather's lessons on honest labor, the resilience forged over years. Everything seemed to shrivel under the weight of her dismissive words. For Marina, this wasn't enough. In an attempt to change the subject, he leaned forward and shared, "Today, one of the tenants thanked me for helping them carry groceries up the stairs." That gesture of genuine gratitude had brightened his day. He wanted to remind them that even small acts mattered. However, Marina merely rolled her eyes. "Groceries? Darius, really? These men here are closing multi-million-dollar deals, managing entire portfolios, and you're bragging about carrying a bag of groceries?" Marina's friends offered polite, strained smiles, but the blow had landed. His attempt to salvage his dignity only fueled her contempt. As the waiters cleared the plates, Marina raised her glass. Instead of the expected anniversary toast, she turned the evening into a public humiliation. "To new beginnings," she declared, her voice cutting clearly through the clinking of cutlery. Her gaze swept across the faces present before settling on her husband. "I want a divorce." Her words struck him like shards of glass. In the sudden silence, it seemed even the waiters froze. His heart pounded wildly in his chest, drowning out all other sounds. Marina continued, her voice even and ruthless. "I'm tired of living with a janitor. I deserve a man who can provide me with the life I dream of. Someone wealthy, who matches my status." The room seemed to swim before his eyes. He saw Marina's friends exchange awkward glances, and their husbands tried not to look his way. His chair suddenly felt too small, his body too heavy. The humiliation burned within him like an unquenchable fire. He wanted to object, to defend himself, but the words caught in his throat. His pride was buried under the weight of her words. Images flashed through his mind. His sister Thalia, who always saw him as her protector, his mother Elena, who taught him that dignity was more important than wealth, and Grandpa Merrick, who believed hardships forged character. All of them gave him strength, but in that moment, their lessons collided with the raw pain of public humiliation. Pushing his chair back, he stood up. The scrape of the legs against the parquet floor pierced the silence. His heart was breaking, but the decision was made. To remain at that table meant losing the last vestiges of his dignity. As he rose without a word, he saw Marina's smirk, as if his silence confirmed her righteousness. Her friends whispered, their gazes darting between them. Turning his back on the table, he walked towards the exit. Every step was heavy but necessary. The maitre d' attempted a polite farewell, but he couldn't meet his eyes. The restaurant doors swung open, and the cold New York night air hit him like an icy shower. Stopping on the sidewalk, he watched the lights of passing cars. The laughter, muffled by the glass, slowly resumed behind him. In that moment, he felt worthless. This evening was supposed to be an anniversary celebration. But instead, it became the night Marina announced his inadequacy to the world. In that moment, he wasn't Darius, the husband, brother, son, or grandson, but simply a man Marina had made a mockery of. The city hummed around him. Taxis honked, voices drifted from the streets, but all he heard were her words echoing in his head. "I deserve a man who can provide me with the life I dream of." Standing outside the restaurant, trying to catch his breath, he felt the icy air pierce his skin. The humiliation he'd endured inside seemed to have seeped into his very being. People bustled past, oblivious to his state. Laughing couples, holding hands, hailed taxis, while he, frozen, stood beneath the city lights. His hands trembled, but not from the cold. He had left his dignity at that table, trampled underfoot in front of strangers and so-called friends. Shoving his hands into his pockets, he moved forward, directionless. Perhaps home, or perhaps nowhere at all. The sidewalk, slick from recent rain, reflected neon signs in puddles like shards of broken glass. Marina's words echoed repeatedly in his mind. "I deserve a man who can give me the life I want." Each repetition wounded him more deeply, as if she whispered them in his ear with every step. After half a block, he leaned against a lamppost and bowed his head, for a moment feeling the urge to disappear, to dissolve into the concrete and leave this world forever. It was then that he heard the soft hum of an approaching engine. A sleek black car smoothly slowed and pulled up beside him. The tinted window slowly lowered, revealing a man in a dark suit inside. His face was stern, his gaze piercing, as if assessing him. "Mr. Cole?" the man asked, his voice deep and even. Darius froze, his first thought that Marina had sent someone to humiliate him further, to twist the knife deeper. After a second's hesitation, he nodded. "Yes, who's asking?" The man offered a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Your father sent me." Those words struck him harder than Marina's insults. His father, Enric Cole, a name he hadn't uttered in years, a man he had buried in silence because the pain of his disappointment weighed heavier than any ex-wife's taunts. "What do you mean, my father sent you?" he asked, suspicion in his voice. "I haven't heard from him in years." The man reached into the passenger seat and pulled out a thick envelope, sealed with red wax. With a steady hand, he extended it from the window. Your father instructed me to deliver this when the time was right. Today, he said, that moment has arrived. Darius stared intently at the envelope, his heart pounding. His father's seal was unmistakable, a lion's head embossed in wax, a symbol he used everywhere, from business contracts to birthday cards when Darius was a boy. He hadn't seen that seal since the night he left home. At first, he didn't move. Part of him wanted to refuse, to tell the man he had the wrong address, to turn and walk away, but curiosity won out. Slowly, he reached out and took the envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind used by people who aimed to impress. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. The man's gaze remained unwavering. "It's a message from your father." His exact words were, "Tell my son, the time has come." The window rose before he could ask another question, and the car drove off, its tires softly whispering on the wet asphalt. Within seconds, it dissolved into the traffic, leaving him alone with the envelope in his hands. He stood frozen beneath the street lamp, the city's sounds muffled around him. His breathing grew shallow as he stared at the seal. Memories of his father flooded him like a torrent, his stern voice teaching him accounting, the sharp arguments when he refused to follow in his footsteps, and the final look of disappointment in his eyes before he walked away for good. Since then, he had received no word from him, not for birthdays, nor holidays, even when his mother pleaded for them to reconcile. He had convinced himself his father had permanently written him out of his life. And now, after so many years of silence, a stranger in a black car informed him that his father had been waiting for the right moment to send him this message. He ran his thumb over the wax seal, but hesitated. Part of him feared what he would find inside. Would it be another lecture, a final insult from a man who believed he had squandered his potential? Or was it something else, something more profound that he wasn't ready to face? The moment I broke the seal on the yellowed envelope, fate seemed to hold its breath. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the creased letter, and the first lines pierced me to the core, making my legs weak. "Darius, my son, if you hold this letter in your hands, then the hour I have long awaited has arrived. You have weathered storms of adversity and humiliation, yet you have not broken. You have preserved your dignity, even when the world laughed at you. Now is the time to claim the place I always knew was meant for you." These words, like an echo from the past, resonated in my mind. For years, I had lived with the conviction that my father had betrayed me, abandoning me to fend for myself. And now, he addressed me from the pages of a letter, as if he had been invisibly watching my every step. At the bottom of the envelope, I found a bundle of antique brass keys, heavy and cold to the touch. Each tag was engraved with numbers and addresses, like markers on the map of my new life. I sifted through them in my hands, feeling the metal burn my palm, my bewildered face reflected in their sheen. My father's words rang like a bell in my head. "The time has come." Standing in the middle of the street, with the letter in one hand and the keys in the other, I was torn between the burning resentment for years of silence and a suddenly rekindled hope that perhaps, all this time, I had been wrong about him. My wife's betrayal, just hours earlier, seemed insignificant compared to this new, unexpected door opening into the unknown. Beneath the dim glow of the street lamp, the letter fluttered in my hand, and the heavy brass keys pressed against my pocket. The city hummed and buzzed around me, but I was deaf to it all, hearing nothing but my father's voice resounding in the letter's lines. It was as if he stood beside me, firm and authoritative, yet as distant and unreachable as ever. For years I had nursed anger and resentment, believing he had turned his back on me when I refused to follow in his footsteps, when I chose independence over living in his shadow. I had convinced myself he wanted nothing to do with me, that in his eyes I was no longer his son. But now, gazing at these lines, my certainty fractured. There was no hint of rejection, only faith and hope. "You have weathered storms of adversity and humiliation, yet you have not broken. You have preserved your dignity, even when the world laughed at you." Unbidden tears welled in my eyes, but I forced them back. Sitting down on a bench, I continued reading the letter. My father's handwriting was clear and firm, every stroke of the pen exuding authority. "Darius, you thought I abandoned you, but the truth is, I watched you. I needed to be sure you could survive without my support. I needed to see if you could find strength on your own. Only one who has known struggle is worthy of accepting a legacy. I didn't extend my hand out of hatred, but out of faith that you would prove your worth. and today you have proven it. The keys you hold open the doors to real estate, bank accounts, and businesses that are now yours. They will be your test, demanding everything from you, but they will also give you the chance to rise above the humiliations you've endured and become the man I always believed you could be. Lowering the letter to my lap, I stared at the keys. Images of the past flooded my mind, long nights spent scrubbing floors, my hands trembling with exhaustion in the mornings, Marina's humiliating comparisons to successful men who had everything I didn't. My father had seen it all, but instead of rescuing me, he had allowed me to carry that burden. And now, when I felt at my lowest, he had placed upon my shoulders the burden and blessing of his legacy. I gripped the keys tightly, feeling the metal dig into my palm. A wave of emotions washed over me, anger for the years of silence, gratitude for his faith, and an overwhelming sense of vindication. For years, Marina had treated me like a failure, as if my worth was defined only by the make of a car or the number of zeros in a bank account. And now, ironically, I held in my hands proof that I was far more than she could ever imagine. But what struck me most wasn't the wealth itself, but the realization that my father hadn't abandoned me after all. He had been waiting for this moment, and in his eyes, I had passed the test. Rising from the bench, I gripped the keys tightly. The city around me no longer felt cold and indifferent. The lights shone brighter, the night air filled with the promise of change. A taxi pulled up, as if sensing my need for direction, and I got in. "Where to?" the driver asked. I unfolded a small tag attached to one of the keys. It listed an address in the Upper East Side. My heart pounded as I told the driver the destination. Arriving, I stepped out onto a quiet street lined with elegant brownstone townhouses. The key slid smoothly into the lock of the wrought iron gate. Beyond it stood a townhouse, stately yet unpretentious, its windows glowing warmly in the night. My father had left this to me not as a gift, but as a responsibility. Darius felt a sacred awe as he roamed the rooms, as if stepping into a temple. His gaze swept over the polished hardwood floors, the bookshelves overflowing with volumes on business, finance, and history, the paintings exuding affluence and refined taste. The feeling was twofold, simultaneously alien and achingly familiar, as if he had entered a part of his life he had once deliberately turned away from. On a table, another envelope awaited him, addressed personally. Inside was a short but poignant message. "Darius, this is merely a starting point. Your future actions will define your essence. Do not let betrayal shackle you with bitterness. Rise above it. Prove that integrity can be as potent a force as ambition. I'm watching you even from afar. Henrik." His legs gave way, and he sank into a chair, crushed by the weight, the betrayal of the woman he loved, years of arduous labor, his father's long silence, and the sudden inheritance that had turned everything upside down. Yet, beneath this burden, an unfamiliar sense of strength and confidence began to stir. Marina reappeared in his mind, sitting at that very restaurant table, smug and triumphant, announcing the end of their relationship. She believed she had broken him. But that night wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter. As the clock struck midnight, Darius stood by the window, gazing at the indifferent city lights. For the first time in years, he felt himself towering above those skyscrapers. The former janitor, scorned and dismissed, was gone. In his place stood a man burdened with a legacy, holding the keys to power and burning with an indomitable will. And though his father's voice came only from ink on paper, Darius distinctly heard it. The time has come. The morning after that fateful night marked the beginning of a new life. Darius woke in the townhouse his father had left him, surrounded by silence and the profound realization of what had transpired. Bright sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting warm patterns on the parquet floor. For years he had lived in cramped apartments with thin walls and tight spaces. Now he was in a place that represented power, legacy, and a future he hadn't dared to dream of. As he made coffee in the kitchen, he felt a steadiness in his hands that had been absent for months. The bitterness of the restaurant humiliation still lingered, but it no longer consumed him entirely. It had become fuel, feeding his drive for victory. Marina's smirk, her mocking gaze, the toast to his downfall, they all flashed in his mind. She had wanted to destroy him that night, to break his spirit, Instead, she had ignited a fire that would drive him forward. At noon, his phone rang. Marina's name flashed on the screen. Part of him wanted to ignore the call, but another part craved to hear her voice now that their world had shifted. He answered. "Darius," she said, her tone softer than he had ever heard. "I was upset last night. I didn't mean to humiliate you like that." Darius remained silent, letting the quiet build until she rushed to fill it. "I heard some things this morning about you, about Henrik." She paused, as if choosing her words. "I didn't know your father was still in contact with you. I didn't know you were an heir." Her words were cautious, but her intentions were clear. The woman who had dismissed him as worthless now yearned for his return. "Marina," Darius said firmly, "that was your genuine desire. You wanted me to feel worthless. You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone because you compared me to your friends' husbands. And I didn't meet your expectations, but you were wrong. I was never worthless. I simply chose a more difficult path." She tried to interrupt, but he raised his voice. "You craved wealth, and now it's before you. But you lost me the moment you traded loyalty for greed." Her tone changed, becoming pleading. "We can start over, Darius. We can be better. You can forgive me. Remember everything we've been through." Darius shook his head, though she couldn't see it. "No, you wanted a man who could buy you happiness. Go find him. I hope he gives you all the Teslas in the world, because what I have now is far more than wealth. I have dignity, and that's something you never valued." He ended the call and let the silence of the townhouse envelop him. He felt not triumph, but clarity. Marina had shown him who she truly was, and his father had reminded him who he was. In the weeks following his father's passing, Darius took possession of his inherited estate. He personally visited the properties that now bore his name and held meetings with business partners who had known Henrik for decades. Initially, in these meetings, the partners looked at him with skepticism, wondering if the son of a mere janitor could fill the shoes Henrik once occupied. However, as he spoke with confidence and displayed a strength forged in struggle, he noticed their respect growing. Each day, as he headed to these business meetings, he recalled the floors he once scrubbed and the janitor's cart he pushed. He held these memories with pride, not shame, for they had shaped him into the man he was, capable of responsibility without compromising his integrity. Every evening, returning to his townhouse, he reread his father's letter, reminding himself that this inheritance was not merely a gift, but a trust, a challenge, and a chance to prove that character mattered more than titles. Months later, passing the restaurant where Marina had ended their marriage, he stopped on the opposite side of the street. He looked through the window, watching couples laughing and raising glasses in celebration. The pain of that night still lingered, but it no longer controlled him. It had become part of the story that shaped him. He smiled and walked away, not as a humiliated man, but as a man risen from the ashes. The lesson is simple. One's identity is not defined by the insults of others or the weight of their expectations, but by how one conducts oneself when life knocks them down. Dignity, resilience, and loyalty are valued above any car, suit, or fleeting status symbol. He lost a wife who never truly valued him, but gained something far greater: clarity, strength, and a legacy built not on appearances, but on endurance. His story should serve as a reminder that a person's worth is measured not by what others say about them, but by the integrity they refuse to relinquish.